On August 29th, 1987, two teenage boys named Kevin Ives and Dan Henry head on out into the desolate Arkansas woods to go hunting, but they never returned. So the next morning, their parents couldn't reach them, and by noon, they received a call that would send shockwaves throughout the entire state of Arkansas. The boys had been shot, tied to the railroad tracks, and run over by a train. Authorities claim that the boys were hit by a train around 4 a.m. and that their bodies were dragged over half a mile at 50 miles an hour. And after finding 1.9 grams of marijuana in Kevin's pocket, the police floated this theory that the boys were high and either accidentally fell asleep on the tracks or chose to die in a suicide pact. And the father really suspicious about it because he was a former train engineer and he always told his kid, hey, be careful around the trains. This is dangerous stuff. Don't mess around near the trains. And both these guys were super happy kids, full of life. So the suicide theory didn't really make sense either. So Don's father asks his friend, who's an outdoorsman, knows his way around the woods. He's a hunter. He says to him, hey, could you go look at the scene of the crime? I can't bring myself to do it. Can you go see if you see anything weird? So he goes there and finds Kevin's severed foot was left at the scene. And he barely found any blood on the tracks. And what blood was present was dark purple, indicating that the boys were dead before the train hit them. And then you got EMTs, police, and staff from the train all saying that there was a lack of blood and pale body parts. Here's the real creepy part. So the conductor, he says, hey, I saw them. They were laying there. I was trying to hit the brakes. I was blowing the horn. But they all said, multiple witnesses on the train said the boys were laying there on the tracks, lifeless, in identical positions, with their arms at their side, completely still. But the police kept pushing this narrative of suicide, like not even considering anything else, not even considering any foul play. So that was making Linda very, very suspicious. But 3 weeks after this happened, the state medical examiner, Dr. Malak, remember that name, you're gonna hear it a lot, ruled that the deaths were accidental, claiming that the boys entered a cannabis-induced state, went into a trance, fell asleep on the tracks, and were ran over. And obviously the parents are like, dude, what the hell are you talking about? He was claiming they smoked the equivalent of 20 joints, ignored the lack of blood on the tracks, and refused to answer questions. And when they kept asking questions, this sicko, you know what he did? He said to them, he's like, hey, do you want to look at the pictures? And they're like, no, what are you talking about, psycho? No, I don't want to look at the pictures of the crime scene. I want you to act like a normal person and answer basic questions. Why are you trying to rush this along? Now, the state crime lab didn't test the blood results for drugs, but they still backed Malak's ruling. But all the people of the town and the state and the media were all just blown away by this guy's ruling, and they were outwardly mocking it, questioning it, everything. So this was getting a lot of attention. This guy, Dr. Malak, did this weird thing where he just drew like a chart on a chalkboard saying, on a score from 0 to 100, normal score for how high you are is a 5. These boys were at 100, and they're like, what does that even mean? So Linda goes around looking for people who are working on this case or were nearby who responded to it. She finds an EMT in the hallway of a hospital that was there that night, and he's got 3 cops near him. Seems very nervous, and she's asking him questions, and he just quietly says, just go look at my report. So Linda goes out and hires a private investigator, demanding a second opinion, but law enforcement continues to obstruct her efforts. Why? And then the report that the EMT told her to find mysteriously disappears. And Dr. Malak was ignoring court orders for evidence to help this private investigator, to help the second opinion. He was withholding it, withholding court orders. Now come to find out, as people start looking into this guy, Malak, more and more, the state medical examiner, they find that he has a really interesting past of medical rulings. So here's some of the things that he did in the past, just in the past couple of years prior to this. So in 1982, Dr. Malak comes across this guy who has 5 gunshot wounds in him, and he calls it a suicide. Some of you know where this is going. In 1986, he ruled an accidental drowning for somebody who had a gunshot wound to the head. When a depressed patient was found hanging in his shower in a hospital, he called it a suicide, okay. But when the wife sued the hospital for negligence, he changed the cause of death to an accident that happened during a, quote, voluntary act of strangulation and masturbation designed to increase sexual pleasure. Now, the craziest one was James Milam, who Dr. Malak claimed had died from ulcer-related natural causes when Milam's skull was recovered and it was determined that he had been decapitated with a sharp knife. So that's who this guy is. That's who Dr. Malak is. So finally they get a second set of eyes on these bodies, and a forensic expert, Dr. Joseph Burton, found clear signs of murder. Don had been stabbed and Kevin's skull was crushed, consistent with blunt force trauma. So Linda kept pushing for answers, but then weird things started to happen. She would arrive home and the front door would be wide open, cabinets open, things that she knew were a certain way when she left, blatantly different when she gets back. So intimidation tactics. There was a group of people trying to intimidate her because she was asking questions. She would see strange vehicles outside of her house just sitting there with the ignition on, staring at the house late at night. And then the sheriff breaks a promise. He said he was going to send the boy's clothing to the FBI, but he didn't. So Linda storms into his office, confronts him, makes headlines, and this is an elected position, so she pretty much gets him voted out of office. So if you think this has been crazy so far, that was like a 10 on a scale from 1 to 10. Now we're about to get to a 5. So these guys weren't the only ones who died here. So check this out. Every freaking witness that started to even mutter the possibility of having known something about it, they all freaking died. Listen to this. So Keith Coney was believed to have been with the boys that night. They were killed and just happened to have left earlier than they did. And he told his mother that he knew too much and feared for his life because he knew what happened. He claims the killers were law enforcement. 9 months later, gets into a motorcycle accident, which that you could say, okay, maybe it's just an accident, but you have the weird part of his throat being slashed in addition to that. Oh, and of course the authorities ruled it just a regular highway accident. They ignored the whole throat slashing thing. So that's one. Another potential informant, Keith McCassell, a nightclub manager assigned to photograph the crime scene, was brutally stabbed over 115 times. This guy was stabbed. So ready? Get this. This one's a doozy. So he had told people that he planned to share information about the murders. So when a neighbor told police that his son might have information about McCassell's murder, officers questioned this kid who was 19 years old. His name was Shane Smith, and Shane initially claimed that he saw 3 men in clown's masks waiting outside McCassell's home. But then the police quickly arrested Shane for the murder. Now, listen to this. This is creepy. This is what Shane says afterwards. So he says, 5 masked men ambushed him and McCassell, held him at gunpoint, later forced him to pose with a knife over McCassell's dead body. They took a photo of him. Then one of the men cut Shane's hand and said to him, say anything about this, I'm gonna kill you and your whole family. And then they just dip off. I mean, if that's true, how crazy that is. And normally you'd say that sounds far-fetched, but like the related to this thing's dropping like flies. So I don't necessarily rule it out. But it's like, who the hell are these people? Like, they're just mothers of dead children. They're running around with clowns' masks and knives, machine guns, like stabbing year-olds. Like, this is freaking Arkansas for you in the 1980s, and you're gonna find out why in a second. Like, Arkansas was the wild freaking West in the 80s. And nobody believed that Shane did this because he was like this scrawny kid, and the kid that got killed was this big, burly guy. So that's 2 right there. Then you got this guy named Greg Collins, who's a friend of the 2 original kids and the kid Coney, who Greg gets shot 3 times and dumped into a forest before he was able to testify before a grand jury because he was scheduled to testify on this case as somebody who had information about it. So that's 3. And each one of these deaths keeps getting these weird rulings of suicide, accident, et cetera, by this guy, Dr. Malak. So Linda's, to this point, freaking out, but she doesn't give up. She focuses her energy on highlighting what the hell is Dr. Malak doing. So they start this whole act called VOMIT, standing for Victims of Malak's Incredible Testimony. And they start protesting his role, and they start seeking help from the governor. Now, if you don't know who the governor is in Arkansas at this time, it is Bill Clinton. Linda reached out to Bill Clinton saying, we need to remove this guy. And Clinton keeps saying, oh, I understand your frustration, but you know, he's overworked and underpaid, and just give him a salary increase and that'll help. So they give him a $14,000 salary increase, to like adding salt to the freaking wound. And she's like, this is unbelievable. Clinton's protecting this guy. Keeps writing letters to Clinton demanding action. He responds politely, but never granted her a meeting. And one day she happens to be at the same location as Clinton when he's doing a speaking event, and she cross paths with him and confronts him. She says, why won't you remove Malak? He's clearly up to something that is no good. Why won't you remove him? Clinton gives this vague BS proposal about forming a review panel and then just quickly scurried away. Oh wait, did you think that potential witnesses were done dying? Nope. So there were more. A guy named Booney Bearden just vanished. To this day, we have no idea where he went. Just disappeared off the face of the earth. A kid named Jeff Rhodes was found shot and burned in a city dump. So that's 5. Somebody named Richard Winters and Jordan Kettleson were both killed by shotgun blasts. So that's 7. And these are all kids who knew something about this case. Either knew these kids, knew where they were that night, were hanging out with them that night, knew what was going on in that area, and were ready to speak about it. So 7 freaking people in the course of the year that had something to do with this case. That is crazy. That is crazy. Now, Linda's just fuming, and they go start doing a protest outside Governor Clinton's governor mansion in 1991 on October 3rd. So they're standing outside with the vomit banners saying, like, remove Malak, Malak. And Clinton walks on out on the balcony on the rooftop and announces that he's gonna not only not remove Malak, but Clinton is going to run for president of the United States. Imagine that. So I respect the hell out of Linda. She's not giving up. She starts speaking to a guy named Dan Harmon, who's the prosecutor. He's the leading prosecutor on the ground doing the investigation into her son's death. Early on, seemed like super passionate about this. Like said, like, we're gonna find out who did this. We will get justice. Don't you worry. And he got himself named a special prosecutor because he wanted to make this happen for her. But after 3 years of no progress, no indictments, Linda realized that he was just using her for political gain, at the very least, and that there's potentially more, even worse than just being used for political gains. So it turns out Harmon was under federal investigation for drug crimes, and informants had long accused him of dealing drugs and protecting dealers while supposedly helping Linda. He used his grand jury access to identify informants and discredit them as suspects. He also targeted Jean Duffy, head of a local drug task force, labeling her crazy and eventually forcing her into hiding. Duffy later revealed that her team had uncovered deep drug corruption tied to high-ranking officials, and that Harmon was actively sabotaging their efforts. This freaking guy was at Linda's side for 3 years, acting like he was passionately pursuing justice, and he's working against them, exposing witnesses, hiding evidence. Probably got a lot of those people killed. Unbelievable. So it gets even crazier. So she says, yeah, this guy's a big-time coke user, but not just that. She says that Dan Harmon was present that night when the boys got killed. He was there, according to Jean Duffy. What? She said that he was there with Keith McCassell and others guarding a drug drop. And according to her, Kevin and Don were caught trying to steal part of the shipment. She said Kevin was already dead and Don was stabbed after trying to escape. So it sounds like, they knew that while they were outdoors kids, this was a frequent thing where you were getting drug drops in the middle of nowhere in Arkansas. For who? Stay tuned. But they caught wind of this, or they saw it. It was like a widely known, like the locals knew a bit. And they tried to do a little skim. And drug dealers don't like that when you try to skim them. So they got in trouble. And that's just the beginning of this web of madness. So check this out. So Duffy has this informant named Jean Wilson, and she had dated this guy Harmon in the past. She was a drug user. She was in those circles. So she talked about drug deals involving Harmon. It said that he had blood on his clothing that night. That same night, he had blood on him. Imagine that. Imagine freaking that. It's crazier than a movie. Now, she gives him all kinds of very helpful information. She's promised anonymity, but a U.S. attorney leaks her information. More witnesses turn up dead, and Harmon ends up arresting Charlene Wilson. And according to Sean Atwood's book that I got a lot of this information from, shout out to Sean, Harmon busted into her house with the feds. It says, "Bitch, I told you if you ever said anything about me, I would have you arrested, and you're under freaking arrest. You're going away." This guy sucks. So she gets sentenced to 31 years on drug charges. Now, later on in 1997, Harmon was convicted of racketeering, extortion, and drug trafficking because he was using his frickin' prosecutor's office to run a criminal drug enterprise, but never got in trouble for the potential murder of the boys. So Linda's just mind blown still, and she tries to go straight to the FBI. And she's like, "Guys, this is crazy. Help me. Nobody's helping me in my state. You're the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Please do something." But the agents bluntly told her there was no evidence of murder and the investigation was being closed. What? She's just beside herself and she starts throwing things out. And now it's time to learn why everybody's so scared to touch this thing. The FBI, the police, the medical examiners, the governor. Why is everybody so afraid to touch this? Here's why. So in the 1980s, Gary Webb busted open this whole big thing that nobody knew about, that nobody was talking about, that the CIA was flying cocaine into America. There was like hardly any cocaine in America before the 80s. And then the CIA, with the use of pilots, like professional pilots, they were smuggling cocaine into the United States. Why, you ask? Stay tuned. So Gary Webb interviews this pilot who was doing these missions for the CIA at one point. And Gary Webb winds up dead, ruled suicide, 2 gunshot wounds in the head later on. God bless him. So we got this Bo Abbott, who's a pilot for the CIA. They're for their cocaine operations. He's flying cocaine from South America into America, places like Arkansas. And this is what he says on the record. Began working undercover for the DEA after his Houston business was robbed. His assignments spanned the globe from infiltrating heroin rings in Mexico to flying DEA aircraft trained for covert landings. By 1979 in Bolivia, he discovered the CIA was protecting major traffickers like Roberto Suarez, using Panamanian airports to move tons of cocaine and arms to the Contras in Nicaragua. So a little bit of context for you here. So Jimmy Carter's presidency was a disaster. He had the mindset of being really non-interventionalist and kind of chopped down the CIA pegs and got them uninvolved in foreign affairs around the world, and Nicaragua was one of them. But the Soviets, the Cubans, they were giving a ton of money to this rebel group called the Sandinistas. The Sandinistas were trying to overthrow the Nicaraguan government. Now, we've been stopping that since the 1930s. We had an agreement with them like, hey, we'll never let rebels take over your country. But Carter pulled the forces back too much, and they get freaking overthrown. They overthrow a government that's been there for 50 years, and this rebel group is suddenly in control of Nicaragua, which is a pretty important place strategically and geographically. It's like 700 miles away from Texas, pretty close. Now, you're going to hear the name the Contras a lot. The CIA wants to undo the damage that Carter did, and they start funneling money to the Contras with the profits from these drug sales. Now, the reason they're doing it this way is because Congress passed a law in 1978 saying, nope, no money to the Contras. We don't care about the Contras. We're not spending taxpayer money to help the Contras overthrow the communist government that took over Nicaragua. So the CIA takes upon themselves to become drug dealers and use that money to get money and weapons to the Contras. They do the same thing with Iran, and that's why it's called the Iran-Contra affair. So this guy Abbott's flying cash and cocaine into Arkansas, protected by the Arkansas State Police. Realizing he knew too much, he documented locations, names, conversations, including tapes of Noriega discussing drug deals with CIA officials, and secured them with his Swedish fiancée. But when he tried to quit, he was threatened, and after spotting armed men near his home, he fled, and this was only to be captured in Mexico. He gets beaten, flown back into the U.S., and put in chains. Others in the CIA, other pilots in this same CIA network were found murdered, went missing, put in jail, and Abbott unfortunately finds out that his Swedish wife had been found murdered. And of all things, she was found dead on a train track. So like, I don't know if they got like a thing here. It's like signature move to murder you and leave you on the train tracks, but that's what happened here. And now this guy's afraid for his life, so he pleads guilty to drug charges and was moved between jails and eventually placed in solitary confinement after a warden said that there was a hit out on him. So he was later framed for violating parole and has all these flimsy charges thrown at him. He starts trying to leak information from prison. That fails. His notes were confiscated, and the recipient was charged. The person he was sending it to was charged with a crime. Then he gets transferred to a psychiatric facility, diagnosed as insane after a brief exam, and detained further despite an earlier clean mental health report. Only after being deemed not dangerous was he quietly released. Later he learned that the officer behind his parole charge was caught in a 25-ton cocaine smuggling operation, allegedly tied to the CIA. Now, his Swedish mother-in-law of the woman who was found down the train tracks blamed him for her daughter's death, revealing that she was trying to leak the CIA documents before being killed to, I don't know, get him out of jail or something. So this guy Abbott concludes that the DEA and the CIA saw drugs as a path to money and power, and better the U.S. profit from it than somebody else. Now, this guy, Abbott, was not the only one to say this. Gary Webb interviewed somebody else too, a guy named Chip Tatum, who also flew cocaine into Arkansas under the guise of medical shipments, organ donors. So he says some interesting things in this interview. Check this out. So in an interview with Ted Gunderson, former head of the FBI in LA, Chip was asked, quote, "Do you have any direct knowledge that Clinton was aware of the drug operation coming into Arkansas? Like, did he even know about it?" Chip says, "When I was at Fort Campbell," Chip says, quote, "When I was at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, I actually flew several missions carrying medical coolers, again, with money and drugs inside of the cases, and flew it to Arkansas. It was delivered to us by the 324th Med Battalion out of South America. It was flown by C-130 to Fort Campbell, marked medical supplies, donor organs, and this particular one was marked. And we were advised to give it to a Dr. Lassiter at Little Rock Air Force Base. We found a large sum of money and kilos of cocaine in one cooler. In the other cooler, we found all cocaine. Those two coolers were picked up by Dr. Lassiter, who actually ended up being, as we found out in later years, a man called Dan Lassiter. That's a big name in the Clinton circle. And he was convicted for trafficking cocaine in Arkansas, but he was pardoned by Bill Clinton. And just to show you what kind of guy this guy Dan Lassiter is, he allegedly was dating a 14-year-old, brought her to a doctor to get her put on birth control, got her addicted to cocaine, and obviously ruined her life, made her his drug slave, basically. So Ted asks Chip, "Do you have any information or evidence that Clinton had direct knowledge that this was going on? Like, this sounds crazy." So Ted says, when he does the flight to Arkansas, gets there as the cooler with the organs and the drugs and everything in it, and he's sitting there waiting for like an hour for this guy Lassiter to show up, and they show up finally with this big entourage of vehicles. There's a van, there's a stretched limo, and two unmarked police cars. And then Lassiter steps out of the vehicle, walks forward. He had two people with him. One stayed in the car, one came over. He introduced the one that walked over to the aircraft to pick up the coolers as the governor of Arkansas. What? Clinton is showing up to a freaking drug pickup? Like, if you saw House of Cards, like, you need to do crazy shit, but he layers and layers and layers away from it. Just freaking out there, out and about, making a freaking pickup. Like, how freaking bulletproof do you feel, dude? This, like, and then the governor of Arkansas extends his hand, and Chip says, "That's the first time I shook the hand of William Jefferson Clinton." He wanted to let me know that the people of Arkansas appreciated me bringing these donor organs to the great state of Arkansas. I asked him, he's like, "Wow, you didn't know you looked in the cooler?" And Chip says, he didn't know I looked into the cooler. If you want to know more about this crazy freaking topic, join my book club. This is one chapter out of Sean Atwood's book, Clinton and Bush Conspiracies, Connection to the CIA, everything from Boys on the Tracks to Epstein. So this tip of the iceberg, we got Rick Ross, we got CIA, we got LA, we got President H.W. Bush, we got FDR. We got a lot of crazy stuff with this one freaking book that we're going through. And we're going through a lot of other ones too, right? We already went through the two books, One Nation Under Blackmail by Whitney Webb. Crazy. So if you like this style of content, head on over to the book club. QR code right here. Link's also pinned in the comments. It's in the description. So you should have no trouble finding it if you want to know more about this crazy stuff. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching. Much love.